Welcome everybody to another episode of my podcast, and as you all know, I'm always delighted to have my guests on. Today is no different, and today I have Daniel Strode, who is, I'm just looking over here to your LinkedIn profile, Culture and Innovation Evangelist, Web 3.0, Blockchain, DeFi, NFT Strategies, but most importantly, Group Director of Culture and Strategies, Global Human Resources at Banco Santander. And for those who are listening, I'm holding up his new book, The Culture Advantage, Empowering Your People to Drive Innovation. And I've already started reading it. I haven't finished reading it, but I will do so. Thank you to Graham Smith for making the introduction. And today's topic is around, does a sales culture matter? But before we get into that, Dan, who, what, why, when, where, maybe, and then we'll go from there.
Perfect. Well, thanks for having me first and foremost, and thanks to Graham also for the introduction. It's been nice getting to know you these past few weeks, knowing what you do, how you do things, listening to your podcast, and now I get the chance to be a guest. Probably too many things to go into much detail about. I started my career in consulting originally, so doing local government consulting, national government consulting, on the highways, on local governments, on all sorts of different things. So that was really interesting. And then I moved into banking industry. Was never a banker though. I always think it's probably preferable to say you're a policeman rather than a banker. So I moved into technology within Santander Bank, then moved into strategy. And then most recently, the last 5 years of my career, I've spent in Madrid looking at the people strategy and the culture of the bank, which is something that's fascinated me ever since. So been here in Madrid 5 years, started teaching the topic of culture and innovation at various universities around the world. And as you say, just published a book called The Culture Advantage, which really encapsulates my passion for this topic, and also hopefully sells to everyone that culture is important, irrespective of company, irrespective of industry, irrespective of your size. Culture is important, and it does lead you to outsized benefits and impacts in the working environment. So that's my message today, and hopefully we can talk it at a bit more depth on some of these things.
Absolutely. And so before we kind of get into it, what's the purpose, or what outcomes do you hope people get from reading your book?
Yeah, not to do any sales pitch, but I would say it's a very practical book. So it's one that you can read within a weekend, or if you're a really eager reader, within a day. Mm-hmm. You read it across a weekend, you can pick up hints and tips on what to do to improve or enhance your current culture within your organizations. It doesn't matter if you're the owner of a company, the CEO of a company, a team leader, or an individual contributor. There's something for everyone. And the book goes through 8 different principles of what I have found in my research to be highly successful companies are doing. They're very consistent in their cultural patterns. You don't have to do all 8 of them, absolutely not. And you can pick and choose what you do want to do. So my aim with the book is just to give everyone basically a menu with real life examples of where this works, how it works, and why they work. And then you go and choose from the menu what you want to do in your day to day.
Perfect. And I can attest that whilst I haven't read it in the weekend, it is an easy read in terms of it's easy to digest, and it's easy to think about the examples that Dan gives and how that might translate into your own world. But before we kind of get into this, the sales culture piece, and this may take us in different directions, what I enjoyed in terms of the opening aspects of your book is the quote around the definition of culture being what you do when no one is looking, which for me is a really interesting concept. So can we kind of explore that a little bit further, and then we'll probably go down some rabbit holes.
Yeah, definitely. So I was thinking, of course, I've been thinking about this topic for 5 years. I always, probably in my early years, I defined culture as the way we do things around here. Mm-hmm. And then latterly, I added this extra part to the phrase, which is when no one is looking. And I think that's really important because I've seen companies and people try to create cultures and force cultures upon one another. And I've seen behaviors arise as a result of that are perhaps not quite genuine. So they're people forcing the culture, forcing their behaviors in the day-to-day to align to a vision that they want to achieve, rather than doing it for what it's meant to do, which is having a genuine intent that underlies it. And, I watch a lot of TV, for better or for worse. And The Good Place was one TV show that I used to watch. I think it's on 5 series now. But basically, the concept there is some people die and they go to what they think is heaven, but actually it's hell. And their only way of escaping the hell is to become good citizens, which they weren't when they were living on Earth. And what you see as the series progresses is they can only escape the hell not by doing good things because they think that will get them to heaven, but because it's the right thing to do. And, that made me think about how does that relate to culture? And I drew the parallels and came up with when no one's looking. And I really think it's true. You cannot fake culture. You cannot force culture. It has to be genuine because you want to do it.
So in a work context, what might that look like in terms of doing something that when no one's looking? Are there any examples you can give of what behavior somebody might be exhibiting that kind of fits that descriptor?
Yeah, so if one of your behaviors, for example, was to think about the customer, put them at the heart of the decision making, you would typically see, and if I talk from a banking perspective, you would typically see customers treated according to their personal and individual needs, rather than the needs of the organization, which would be short-term sales pressure, financial focus. And, we've seen this play out at Wells Fargo in recent years. They were mis-selling products to customers. They were even selling credit cards and different products to customers that didn't even exist or had passed away. So that was a typical or a very strong case of not living the culture that you wanted. So if you wanted to be customer first, you would really listen and help your customers rather than drive some sort of financial agenda that sits behind that. And I think that's a good example of how that could manifest in the day-to-day.
So that's a really interesting angle. If I put my sales hat on, that is almost in tension with kind of what a salesperson is driven by. Now, we're not saying you should be mis-selling stuff and you should be not putting the customer first, of course, but that doing what is right for fundamentally the customer can create tension between what a salesperson has been driven to do by KPIs. And we always know that if you wait to quarter end, you can probably get the better deal because they're under pressure to get to meet their numbers and so on. So how does a sales leader or even an organization, I guess, because from my personal experience, a sales function has always been you're just there to do a role, which is sell and make the numbers. And I'm going to be bold here and say dispensable rather than indispensable. Someone else is always another bum on a seat, which we can do just to churn through the numbers. So how does an organization start to think about, we want to put the client first, we have to answer to shareholders or what have you, and how do you manage that tension that's going to then create for what a salesperson has to do on the day-to-day, but what you're trying to achieve in terms of that end goal or vision, and how then does that then play into the wider role of the organization, colleagues and employees, etc.?
Yeah. So we're going down the rabbit hole now. So let's get into
Sorry.
two things on my mind. So the first is I always say that culture is your sustainable advantage, and it can help you make your business sustainable. So what I mean by that, and it applies to sales in this case, is if you look after the customer, you treat them well, you are more likely to have that level of repeat business, relationship over time, good bond with them, strengthen the business, and so on and so forth. And that is, to the extent, a sustainable business, something that maybe you cannot predict the revenue moving forwards, but you can have a good indication that there's going to be some revenue in the future, as well as today when you sell them the first widget. So doing things the right way is always a good move.
Yeah.
Of course, it comes with, as you say, the pressure to your other stakeholders, the pressure to the end of the quarter, the targets that you have to hit. And it's always that fine balance. The second thing, though, and it relates to the fine balance, is I always consider that a company, again, irrespective of industry or size, has four main stakeholder groups. So the first, and it does start with your people, so the people that work there. So in this case, your sales force. The second is the customers. And then the third is your shareholders or stakeholders, however that might be. Mm-hmm. And your fourth stakeholder group is the communities that you operate in. And I like to think of those four groups of people, all interested stakeholders in the business, as a virtuous circle. So as to say, if you strengthen one of those areas, you inherently strengthen the other three. So if I have happier people, then I'm going to have more productive people working longer in the company, staying with us longer, increasing their knowledge, so on and so forth. And thus, they will serve the customers better, which makes the customers more loyal, which makes them more profitable, which means we can give extra returns to the shareholders. And hopefully they approve that we can then spend and reinvest in our communities that we operate in. And you can start anywhere on that virtuous circle. So I think the first is culture giving you that sustainable advantage, thinking about business for the long term. And then the second is it helps everyone when you look at it through this virtuous circle lens. I guess the big challenge that companies have to face when they're going through a cultural transformation is to have that long-term mindset. And of course, when we're thinking about sales cultures, that can be very, very difficult and very aggressive to change that. So step by step.
Indeed. And there's, in terms of the work that we're doing around employee experience, I think it's Gallup research that shows that you can increase sales by as much as 20%. If you have, happy employees, i.e. happy sales team, because the logic just dictates in terms of that. And as you were talking, the story that you share so eloquently in your book around kind of the journey that Lego Group went on, when, dare I say it, they kind of lost sight of the customer and the impact that then had, and then the new CEO came in and kind of flipped it back to we need to get back to the core values of our customers. So do you want to share that brilliant story for the audience? So I think that's a really neat way to, most people can relate to Lego in some shape or form, and B, I just think it's a really nice story to illustrate what can go wrong, but then how you can bring it back. Yeah,
definitely. So this is one of my most favorite stories and favorite companies. As you say, everyone can, or most people can relate to Lego. So, Lego started in the 1930s as a wood manufacturer. They were actually making tables and chairs. The recession hit, the economy was in trouble, of course, with the wars and everything like that. And they started manufacturing children's toys at that point in time. So their best-selling toy was actually a wooden duck that was in the houses of many children in the local area. And Lego, of course, spent the next 60 years growing year in, year out, record profits every year, doing great business. And the customer was at the heart of their culture. That was something that was very, very clear. Then the 1990s came along and they went through 10 years of a very tough patch, a decade of hard times, perhaps nearly going bankrupt, nearly going out of business because they lost sight of their customer. What happened was they stopped talking to the customers. They stopped consulting with them. They offshored much of their manufacturing to third parties, different locations. And of course, this was, with good intentions. It was all about reducing costs, trying to boost sales, trying to think of new products to push, and so on and so forth. But actually, they lost sight of the customer. So the new CEO came in and said, what shall we do? And he said, well, we need to transform the culture once again to be customer-centric, to bring us back to what we were in the 1930s when we only thought about quality of product and quality of customer service and care. And it's interesting because what he did and what he implemented was he brought back in-house the manufacturing. And today, 98% of Lego pieces are manufactured in-house every day. As you know, Lego is quite a cyclical product. So it's not like banking where people keep their account for their whole life, more or less. Actually, every 12 to 18 months, a Lego product kind of becomes obsolete unless it's a bestseller. So they implemented customer focus groups once again. And by the way, they're doing this with children. So if you can do focus groups with children, you can do it with anyone. So they really got to know, what does the customer expect? What do they want? They started new partnerships. You've probably seen Lego films, Lego shoes with Adidas, different franchise opportunities, started expanding and moving out of their traditional lane. They changed their mindset and they said, we're no longer in the toy manufacturing business. We're in the children's playground business. So what happens when a person doesn't buy Lego? Do they go and buy Mega Bloks or Meccano? Probably not. But they probably go and buy a PlayStation or an Xbox. Mm-hmm. So we're competing on a different scale now. So they expanded their market, expanded their mindset, refocused on the culture of customer at the center of what they do. They now have Lego innovation and hackathons and different things where customers can go online and give their ideas. Many of their best products are customer idea generated. So going back to the customer, and as of today, again, record profits year in, year out, growing every year, doing really great, and with happy customers. So it really does point to, in this case, putting customer at the center and having employees really bought into that culture as well, rather than trying to do what they consider to be the best things or manufacturing the way they consider the products they consider. Listen to the customer in this case.
It's just such a brilliant story, and I had no idea that Lego started out as a wood manufacturer back in the 1930s. Because I grew up within the 1980s, and Lego was Lego, right? But I think what stands out for me there is, children are the most unforgiving people on the planet. So if you annoy them, they're gonna let you know about it, and of course they're going to influence their parents in terms of what they do and don't want. But it was more the reframing or Lego reframing kind of who the customer or what the customer does and where they need to be, rather than we manufacture toy bricks, to the playground analogy that you gave, which then kind of segues very nicely into your book around the cultural advantage and empowering your people to drive innovations. The next piece of where Lego innovates, and you talk about the movies. So there was a brilliant move because adults wanted to go and see the Lego movie and the Batman movie and so on. But my children love the AR aspects of Lego, and the spooky one, which I don't know what brand of Lego it is. And I look at some of the Technic Lego. I'm like, my goodness, you can plug it into a computer and now control this and all this type of thing. But that bold ability to truly understand your customer and understand where your customer is going, that for me, I feel is one of the biggest missing pieces in B2B sales around. We all talk about being client centric in the market, but very, very few truly are, in terms of that example that you have just given with Lego, which I think is a brilliant one. So if I think about where kind of the role of sales and marketing is primarily B2B, we're not innovating. We're not really doing anything different. We're doing the same things that we did 20 years ago and just trying to layer technology on it, forgive me, and think that that's going to solve the problems. And we can see in most cases it's augmenting the problem, making the problem actually worse and annoying the buyers even further. So if a sales leader is listening to this, or a marketing leader is listening to this, or whoever is listening to this, where does one start to challenge the culture, the status quo around reframing what the 21st century client is of today? And I'll caveat this because I appreciate broad brushstroke between industry, size of organization, and so on. But where would you encourage people to start thinking in this space?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I'm coming from the HR background, and I always think our recruiters, and that means recruiters in any industry, any company, are speaking to candidates every single day. They're on the face with their customers, and they're understanding, what do the customers want? What do they need? What are the salary expectations? Do they want to work from home? how's the hybrid workforce, now operating? They know everything, but they're so busy doing their day-to-day job, being measured by how many phone calls did you make today and the KPIs, that we never ask them, what have you learned? What's your opinion? And I get the feeling that it's the same in sales, which is you have the B2B sales. They're very focused on the KPIs in their role, and they try to accomplish everything that they need to accomplish according to those metrics. But did we ever ask them, what can we improve? How should we go? What's the customer looking for? And that will make you much more successful. So I would say probably the first thing to do in any company is try to foster this culture of speaking up and raising ideas, because your people are very, very powerful. They do have the ideas. They are there with the customers. They are there selling on the front line every day, day in, day out, and they know what to do. But you have to make it safe for them to be able to speak up and raise ideas. Without that safety, you will be doomed to fail. So that would probably be my first, really, really impactful tip that you could do.
And the irony is that's a really easy caveat, notwithstanding you need to create the culture of safety to give the people the comfort, possibly even some element of training to have those types of conversations. But that's a relatively easy tweak to make, especially in the world where it could be an AE, for example. So the customer's already a customer. Now they're looking for the upsell and the cross-sell. Or, again, I'm talking kind of SaaS service world, customer success teams. And because we now live in the world of conversational intelligence, loads of platforms out there are recording phone calls anyway for training and monitoring purposes. But from a sales perspective, these conversation intelligence platforms are designed to help the seller sell more effectively, rather than if you then could create even just adding one more question to the end of the discovery call that then helps to give you that data and insight dependent on the on the response. We have the ability to do this. So why then do you believe that we're not doing this, even though we say publicly we're client-centric and we put the customer first?
The biggest challenge, and I've seen this in hundreds of companies, so anyone listening to this who says, we have this challenge, how bad? Don't be worried, you're not unique in this. It is leadership. It does start with your leaders. And the truth is, whilst culture is everybody's responsibility, as I say in the book, leaders must lead by example. People are watching what they do and just as much what they don't do. So when you say and you put on the wall that you're customer-centric, it doesn't make you customer-centric. What makes you actually customer-centric is when your chief finance officer says, okay, we're going to miss the targets for this quarter, but we're building something for the future and that's okay. And you have that safety and you have that permission. That's what makes you customer-centric. That's what makes your culture real and tangible. So I think start with leadership every single time. And there's many, many instances of absolutely great leaders out there in the workplace who lead by example, live the values, live the behaviors of a company. And when they do that, the results are absolutely outsized because people observe those behaviors. And by the way, I also say what gets recognized gets repeated. So when you live those behaviors, people will copy them. And conversely, when you don't live a certain culture or certain behaviors, people will copy that as well. So when you shout in a meeting, well, people will think it's okay to shout in a meeting and they will copy it. When you show kindness and compassion and empathy, they will mirror and copy that as well. So leadership.
Again, when one's talking about this in the round, and I guess in a bubble on a podcast, it sounds so obvious and it sounds so easy. I'm a big fan of Carol Dweck and mindset theory, fixed mindset and a growth mindset. She shares similar examples when you've got leaders with a fixed mindset, the outcome, Enron, for example, that can lead to, which ironically was the outcome of the sales culture that had been created and how commission checks were being paid before things, even contracts were signed and being booked. I mean, this is hard, right? Because it's people. And I used to be in recruitment in a former life, and I'll always say selling people was the hardest thing I've ever done because you never know what they're going to do what they're going to do next. And it comes full circle back to, in my mind, and just looking the narrative out in terms of the AE, SDR kind of complex, the BDR, there are too many salespeople in the process, KPIs are driving the wrong behaviors. And as Marcus Kalki, who's a brilliant leader in this field, talks about that we should be incentivizing our sellers to reward them handsomely on a year 3 contract renewal, not trying to get ink on paper, because you're actually then going to focus on keeping your customer and making your customer happy and growing with them, rather than I'm just trying to sell this in any way I can. And I think it's also interesting that you kind of bring the CFO into this conversation around, we recognize that we're going to miss our numbers this quarter, but we can see the longer term vision as to where we are, where we're going. Which then, if I come back to the question around, does a sales culture matter? It's actually take away the word sales, and it's, does a culture matter? Because it is all interlinked. And I don't know why my mind has gone here, but I'm thinking of the way that an ant colony works. Because everybody knows what their role is, irrespective of hierarchy, because we're all going towards one end goal. Which then reminds me of and I paraphrase the chap that was asked what he was like a cleaner, or he swept the floors on one of the Apollo missions, and he was asked, what do you do here? And his response was, I'm helping put people on the moon. Because that's how he saw his purpose towards the end goal. He didn't see himself as someone that tidied up the office. I think I know what the answer is going to be, but how do leaders then start to engender that type of understanding of how somebody fits into that overarching vision, purpose, that without, purpose in terms of saying of getting there? Follow-up question, picking up on your point around your people are your most powerful asset. How do you then empower them to almost socialize that out into the market, so that it's not just leadership talking it, the business is actually acting it?
Yeah. So I think if we're talking about aviation examples, something that comes to my mind is Southwest Airlines in the US. So, they set the trend of turning around their planes within 10 minutes, which made them much more profitable and efficient. And the reality is, when I think about it, I would not like to clean a plane. Neither would I like to carry or throw heavy luggage from outside the plane, inside the plane, and vice versa, especially not when I only have 10 minutes to do it. So they created this culture of fun at work, fun in the workplace. And now you have people who are really happy and engaged, having fun, moving heavy bags from one place to another and doing it with such efficiency that it's scary. And they did that because of the culture. And the reality is, you can't beat or you can't compete with people who are having fun at work. So I think when I think about the sales culture, having fun at work is very, very important. The second thing is, we always talk about the KPIs and we say, how do you compare and contrast that? And is there the tension with the culture? Well, there is research from Latham and Locke, which they did in 1991, and it stands true 30 years later, which is the more difficult goals you set people, the higher and the harder goals, they called it, the better the results are. So they found that the more difficult the goals were, consistently leads to higher performance. And I think in terms of aviation, again, the interesting one here is probably SpaceX, the rocket company, the rocket manufacturer.
Yeah.
They set themselves a very hard goal, which is to make humans a multi-planetary species. There's many constraints in this. The first is a financial constraint. They're not working with an unlimited budget. And then the second constraint is Elon Musk himself, because he wants to do this during his lifetime. So there's a speed there that needs to happen, So that's probably, a very high and a hard goal, probably one which I think they'll achieve in the coming years. At least they've managed to put the Falcon 9 up into the sky faster than I could have imagined. So
Yeah.
they're going in the right stage. So I think, the higher the goals, the higher the performance. When you think about the sales culture, KPIs don't have to come at the negative aspect of having your culture impacted negatively. It can contribute when you think of it in that way. And the second thing is, when you create those environments which are fun, you probably have better outcomes as well.
And again, reflecting on the word fun, it's just a human, it's just human, right? And if I reflect on the times that you've had that cohesiveness, you've had fun times within the team, and the kind of the camaraderie that creates, and then we're all kind of working towards this together. So the flip side on that then is, how do you do that in a hybrid world? And I'm reflecting on a mental health talk we had yesterday about keeping an eye out on your colleagues, and if you notice they're not putting their screens on, if you notice they're not coming into the office as often, if at all, because it's kind of really hard to do that if we are disconnected, because humans crave, in my view, tactile. We need to be pack animals. We need to be together, back to the kind of the cave person days. So how do leadership start to try and build this in a very, very different world, I guess, to where we were pushing 3 years ago?
I mean, yeah, you're right. The world has changed completely in the last 3 years. I do think that hybrid works. I am a very big believer that we do need the office, or we need regular meetings with our colleagues. We need to do those team building activities. We need to create those relationships, have those deep bonds with one another to really get to know what makes each other tick, and so on and so forth. This is absolutely essential. So I don't ever see a place where there's no need to meet your colleagues and you can be fully remote and never have that face-to-face interaction. So for me, hybrid works, and we need to keep promoting face-to-face interactions. Critical. In terms of what can leaders do, or team leaders, managers do, I'm a very big fan of setting what I call routines and rituals in place. And actually, routines and rituals are one element of how you change a culture. We look back to the 1980s, where the first research about culture was happening. From people like Jerry Johnson, sorry. Jerry Johnson set out that routines and rituals were 1/6 of the most important things to change when it comes to culture. And some of the things I like to say here are, leaders should have a specific routine of one-to-one check-ins with their employees. They should have a specific routine of doing performance evaluations and reviews, checking the metrics. Then they should have rituals, which are like one-off things, where they have the team get together in an on-site meeting or an off-site meeting to go and eat pizza together, whatever that might be. So if you set up enough of these touch points, either as a routine or a ritual, I think you'll be able to connect with your people much better than just not having these in place and trying to figure out, this one has the camera off. Does that mean anything? Do I need to pay attention? So you do need to work on this. And it's not probably something that comes as second nature to most people. We haven't lived in this hybrid world before for the majority of staff, especially in the sales environment. Much of that has been in person, working in teams, being part of the pack, being together, and it's different. So we do need to give people the time to learn these skills. We do need to train the managers and the employees on how to work in a hybrid environment, and we need to make an effort because it is difficult. But with good planning, I think good routines and rituals can be put in place, and do it consistently, and we'll all improve as we go along this journey.
Picking up on that word effort, it's a two-way street, right, between both manager and managee or line report. This has to be a two-way street, but then that comes down to communication and etc. But you put in the framework that you just described, that all should start to kind of manifest itself naturally. Final question, and I never give any of my audience kind of the heads up that I'm going to ask this one. It's not a scary one, but I want the knee-jerk reaction. Not the knee-jerk reaction, but I want the the initial kind of thought is the world of the metaverse and all of this fun stuff. Where do you believe that the metaverse is going to take business, and I guess more importantly from a culture perspective? Because I'm playing around with it. I've had meetings in workrooms. I think it's amazing. I can absolutely see its place. You see this huge debate online about what it isn't, where it's placed in. People putting up, look at the newspaper cutting from, I think, where it was, the early 90s about the internet being a complete waste of time. Or these clips from Tomorrow's World about what a computer may or may not be. But from what you're seeing in your personal capacity as the research you've been doing, but also from what your organization is seeing and thinking, where do you think we'll be in 5-10 years time with our friend the metaverse?
I think, now this is scary because I'm going to put into something recorded for the first time ever my views on this topic. When I've spoken to students or other companies, no one can prove what I've said. But I would say 5 to 10 years time, yes, I think there'll be a metaverse. What we need to decide now is, what is the metaverse? What does it look like? At the moment, each company or many companies are building their own metaverses, which is actually completely against the idea of a metaverse, because why should Facebook or Meta have a monopoly on the metaverse and everyone needs to go there? We need open platforms. So I think metaverse, we're probably further away from having something truly usable than what most people think. But in 10 years, I think we'll be there. And it will be wonderful, and it will be, fully interactive, and people can get together and have the meetings, have the conversations, see each other, see what the other people are seeing, and it's going to be wonderful. But a bit longer in the future. I think in the more short term or the near term future, the most interesting thing for companies, and especially for sales, by the way, I think are non-fungible tokens, this concept of NFTs. I think these, deployed well and considerately between now and the next 3 years, are going to be very, very important for businesses. At its core, if I have to explain the concept of an NFT, I could say, you have the underlying technology, which is the blockchain that sits underneath it. You know this, but maybe I give a brief introduction. Basically, this could be considered as a immutable network that proves what happens on that network. So if I own one NFT, I am the sole custodian of that. Nobody can say that actually somebody else owns that asset. It's absolutely in my name. It's proven in a distributed ledger, and that's a fact. And I think this is a real opportunity for businesses and for sales, because by distributing NFTs, and by the way, we've seen some companies doing this. So Pepsi have done some NFT drops. Christie's have been involved in NFT auctions, and there's a lot going on in the space. Companies will be able to know their customers better than ever before, because they will have immutable digital on-chain records of their customers and their actions, and they will be able to engage and reward their customers like never before. So, for example, if I give you an NFT today and you're holding that in your profile in your wallet, I can go and check, and I can say, look, Alex also is holding these 10 NFTs, or has bought products from these shops and has these digital receipts in his wallet. So I know this customer profile, or I know his interests. And because I have that existing relationship with you, I can say, okay, in the future, I'm going to give you something, or promote you a product, or market you something using another NFT or another way of communication. So I think it's really interesting that we're going to start living perhaps lives a bit more publicly than ever before, and your wallets and your transactions that happen on the blockchain, because they're going to be public, are going to be carefully curated in some senses to your likes and interests and needs as a customer. And companies are going to be able to use that data to help you as a customer. There's nothing more frustrating than being served a Google ad for some jeans that I already bought last week. But at least in this way, we will know that you've bought the jeans, and we'll be able to target you in a much more effective way. So I'm really, really big on the next 5 years, NFTs and digital products and digital distribution, getting to know your customers. And then 5 years later, the metaverse, I would say.
that is I think the first time that someone's actually managed to explain this concept to me in a way that my tiny mind now understands. And it's interesting because Starbucks have launched their loyalty program, and their marketing didn't mention NFT, didn't mention crypto, didn't mention anything. It's just, this is the new way we are going to engage with our community. And now hearing you articulate it in that way that a simpleton like me can understand, that makes sense. And my brain is now going a million miles an hour in terms of how might that translate into kind of our world of professional services, or more broadly. And kind of Gary V, there's V Friends he launched, and everyone's like, oh, what the hell's V Friends? And only yesterday he's launched V Friends with Mattel. So now you can buy physical toys with Mattel, but I assume that toy which you hold, the contract is the it's still the NFT, which then creates that community. So thank you.
Well, it's interesting because I think I didn't do a good job at all, because I was completely unprepared, as you say. But let me give two really quick examples of other use cases that I can consider coming right now in the pipeline. So the first would be if you owned or if you had an NFT which was membership to your golf club, or membership to a restaurant. At the moment, the current model is you have a one-to-one relationship with the restaurant or the golf club. You pay £1,000 a year for your golf membership. When you don't want it anymore, you stop paying, and that's the end of the story. But now, if you own an NFT and have a digital asset, you can transfer that to who you consider. So you could transfer it to me, and maybe there's a long waiting list for the golf club or the restaurant, and you could sell it to me for £2,000. And by the way, you can code into these contracts royalties for the business. So if you sell it to me, actually you don't receive the 2,000, but say you receive 90%, and the golf club gets a 10% royalty.
Yeah.
So the golf club actually makes more money because there's a secondary marketplace, and you make money because you had the foresight to buy something and use something ahead of time before it was popular. And because you made a good decision, you're now being rewarded, whereas previously you wouldn't have been rewarded. So that's one interesting use case. And then the second, I think, is we're going to go much bigger on digital ownership. And I think there's opportunities for business to digitalize their value. And I can see a time where instead of these horrible house contracts and house deeds and having to keep pieces of paper, you would just put that on the blockchain. And when you sell the house, you transfer the digital asset online as well, or on chain. And you would do away with swathes of paper overnight. So that also has, applications when it comes to receipts and those kind of things. Imagine that Starbucks, every time you go there, they send you a receipt, which is actually on the blockchain. It's an NFT. Yeah. And what they did was they partnered with a local artist in the community to do some art for that receipt, and say that, 1,000 customers every day get this receipt with the special art. Imagine that they find the next Picasso. In 10 years' time, you're holding that thing, you can go and sell that. And that's an asset that you can sell. So you're happy as a customer as well. So the possibilities are infinite. I need to prepare better case studies and examples. No, I hope it gives a flavour.
It does, and I forgive me for kind of putting you on the spot, because my sense is not the emotional reaction, but the instant thought versus a necessarily very well crafted kind of prepared thought, in my view, is actually better because it comes from the heart, as it were. Not saying that it wouldn't ever come from the heart if it was is prepared, but that's already made me just think very, very differently about all this. And I've got some ideas which I'm going to noodle on and probably follow up with you in terms of between us. But I'm conscious of time, because you've got to go and plant some trees, I believe, in a minute, which is a very good thing to be doing. So, Dan, where can people find you that are listening? Because those that are listening, Dan's got a lovely background with his book and all that kind of stuff. But where can people find you if they want to learn more about you, how you might be able to help? I don't know if you do help other organizations in this. I don't want to put you on the spot, but where can I point people to?
No. If people want to connect with me on LinkedIn, I'm Dan Strode on LinkedIn. You'll find me there. That's my favorite social media, as it were. But if you want to go and navigate to my website, which is danielstrode.com, you can also sign up to my blog there, have a look at some of the things I'm working on, and get in touch with me on email on the website. So happy always to receive queries or inquiries from curious minds about culture. As I say, it's the topic that I'm driven by, the topic that I love. So anything I can learn from your listeners and anything I can give back, the more the merrier.
Fantastic. I'll put the links down here. I'm slowly getting this right after 100 plus episodes of where to point. The links, of course, will be in the body copy of the text as well. But Dan, thank you so much for today. I really appreciate your time and insight. Go and get the book. It's a great read. I'm halfway through it at the moment. Highly recommend it. But Dan, thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the day.
Will do. And to my listeners, thank you as always for tuning in. Really appreciate it. If you want to be on the podcast, you know what to do. If you want to recommend people to be on the podcast, like Graham did, thank you, recommending Dan. You know what to do. But for today, that is it. As ever, I'll see you next week on next week's topic, which I don't know what that is because I'm that disorganized, but it's been great to have you here today as ever. Thanks all.